Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the AFTERBUZZ TV After Show for Preacher. It's season 2, episode 5, and we got a whole lot to talk about. We're just gonna roll some joints out of pages from the Bible or something. Just kidding, that was in the show. Let's talk about it, guys.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AFTERBUZZ TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
Oh my goodness, guys.
So let's take out our Bibles. You promised.
Let's get it out.
You promised.
Yeah.
How's everybody doing? We're back together.
We are together.
Full strength.
We got the gang back together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Here, gonna talk Dallas.
Yeah.
Gonna talk the dark side of Jesse Custer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real dark. Real dark. It's AFTERBUZZ TV, guys. We're talking Preacher. It's the weekly after show here, and we are pretty freaking excited. We're about halfway through the season now, and I just love the show. I think it's
halfway already.
Is there 10 again?
I think it's 10.
I want to.
Somebody tell us.
It
think
feels
it's
like we
longer.
just began.
Somebody
Me
Google.
too,
It
yeah.
does seem
I
like
think it's like 12.
Is it 12?
I think it's long. I
you're
think
right.
this season was approved for more
Well,
episodes.
we'll never know.
Yes.
No, we'll know. Just check Wikipedia. But we're definitely more close to halfway, if not halfway.
Yes, we are definitely, and we're getting there, and the pace is going really well. So let's introduce the panel so we can break the whole thing down
Yes.
for you guys. On the far
Yes.
side of the table, we got Matt Marr. What's going on, man?
Hello, everybody. Hello, Sugars. I'm Matt Marr. You can find me at the Matt Marr.
What's going on, guys? It's Nate Miller over here. You can find me on social media at DogLikeNate.
And I'm Dave Child. You can find me at mrdavechild at davechild.com. My name's Dave Child.
You guys can find me at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter or Instagram. There's a guy on Twitter that follows me and tweets at me sometimes, and his Twitter is Nate's a Duck. And it's a great Twitter, Nate's a Duck.
Is that
if
true?
you're watching
Is
or
Nate
listening.
a duck?
It's not.
No,
it's
but
a
that's not
different
your
Nate.
Twitter.
Separate Nate.
But every time you say Nate, I'm like, oh yeah, his Twitter's Nate's a Duck. That's what he's gonna say.
Now I'm gonna
Yeah.
accidentally
Yeah.
drop Nate's a duck.
Nate's a Duck.
Yeah. Well, you guys gotta friend each other at least, or follow each other.
I mean,
Yeah.
I gotta read his tweets first.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
maybe,
I don't just hand out my follows.
How
willy
much of a
nilly.
duck is Nate?
maybe he's
I just
watching or listening, and if he
Imagine
is,
you
you
like in a
guys.
throne going, no, no, not retweet.
Look, all it takes is one really good tweet, and you get the follow.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally.
It's true.
Or like a lot of bad ones, you get the unfollow. So, guys, we're going to chat the episode, but before we do, we should remind everybody, please give us a rating or review on iTunes. It's very
Yes.
helpful for us to stay high in the standings here. We provide
Write
free
something.
content on AfterBuzz TV, pretty much devoid of ads, too. So if you guys can help us out with that, that's how we do this. We keep the lights on that way. That would be awesome of you to do. And I think pretty much aside from that, we'll do like a little spoiler thing at the end, because some of us are comic book readers, but we'll
Yeah.
be vague throughout the episode about it, because we try to be vague. This isn't a comic book show. It's a TV show.
Yeah.
Yes.
14 episodes this season.
Oh,
14.
there you go. Look
hey,
at that.
we're
Nice.
not
So we're
even
a little
we're
over
not
a
even
third.
halfway.
Oh, but we're not halfway yet.
But the
That's
pace
the important
still.
thing. The pace is so good. It's making me. This is what I feel like. This season is a lot stronger than last season. I feel like they're kind of learning how to write TV, and last season felt like it was screenwriters that feel like they could just make a very long movie. So you're seeing the beats happen of a movie, and this time it feels like it's just. Everything feels like a chapter. It feels more like a book. It feels more like a novel.
Yeah.
And it feels more like a strong series because something happens and something is revealed and the story is moving forward in every single episode. And this one was very character-centered, but I feel like we still learn something. And so it's enough to move the story along.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys. I had a kind of an exciting week this week. I got to talk to Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, and Sam Catlin about the show a little bit on Thursday.
Well, I
There
feel
was
terrible about my life.
Well, it was a random.
thanks for the invite.
Way to invite us,
I
buddy.
ate a bag of Doritos.
It was a last
No,
minute
that's
thing
awesome.
for this weird screening that it was bizarre. It was Film Independent screened an episode of Preacher at LACMA, and they screened one episode of the show as like a special Film Independent thing. There was no cast members. There was 4 members of the press there. And I got a friend of mine who like runs the outlet was like, hey, do you want to interview people? And I was like, sure. And I went, and that was it. There was
That's
4
awesome.
of us.
That's awesome.
So to speak to your point, because the question I asked each of them was, this show is getting a lot of accolades this season for basically a soft reboot, like basically killing everyone and starting over. Looking back, do you feel like you guys handled season 1 correctly? And each of them said pretty much the exact same thing, which was like, yes, we had to lay the groundwork. We feel like if we hadn't laid that groundwork, we wouldn't have been able to do what we're doing in season 2.
Right.
100%. Though I believe one of them, I think Evan or Seth, and you guys can find these on Red Carpet Report if you look it up. But I think one of them said like probably could have been like a little faster. Probably could have gotten going in the second half of the season there.
Yeah, I definitely think the setup was worth it. Like if they've set up so many things that now we're able to move at this space, and like you don't feel like anything's missing, but at the same time, it's not like everything's happening all at once. It's just paced out really well. But I definitely think you could make the argument for like maybe like a 2-hour movie cut of the first season that would get you more or less what you need to see.
It was just a lot of the same vibe in season 1.
And it's a lot, like there's so many of the like side plots and stuff. I get, the whole it's real life. Sometimes stories don't have an end. They just die. That's the end.
Right.
But because there was so much time spent on that, and then we only got these 3 characters, it feels like a lot of what, essentially is not important.
They didn't even really go anywhere, too. Literally, they've gone so many other places in this season already, and they were just
physically moved.
So it's like, but when I think of it now, it's like when you think of like, especially in seeing this episode, when you think about, this episode had like one theme. It was like, I think of kind of like monotony and things like that. And we think about him going back to that church and how that church now, it made me think of the church, like when he said he was going to go back kind of in the episode, I thought of it more. I had this feeling of like a prison, which I didn't think about that before. Cause I guess of what, again, with the groundwork they laid.
Yeah.
And it made me, I guess, cause we're seeing a lot of this. I feel like, I saw a lot of it through Tulip's perspective, like that scene.
Well, we got some really nice backstory this episode.
Yeah.
I mean, it was I think long overdue to find out what had happened in between. So let's start there. I think we should start with some of the flashback stuff. So
start in Dallas itself, which is why the episode's called Dallas.
Yes,
Because they're hanging out in Dallas.
Right, and in some ways, reliving the same day over and over and over again, the sort of Groundhog Day nature. It was reminiscent of the hell we were getting in the previous episode.
Yeah, another fantastic montage. And this one really, too, kind of like slipped into. I didn't realize this is what was happening until it really like kicked in, which I thought was great.
I'd have to say this isn't a spoiler for Game of Thrones.
Oh my God, I thought this too.
It was such a weird coincidence that there's a really good monotony montage that happens. We won't say what happens for people that haven't seen Game of Thrones, but last night and tonight was another good monotonous, like stuck in their way montage, and it was just great to kind of see how both of these shows.
I literally wrote that,
showed it off. And with Custer, you kind of saw him stuck in this frame of mind where he just really wanted to have a baby.
Right.
And he felt like that was the one saving grace, and all he needs to do is be a normal person. And I love the influence of John Wayne that we have in this episode, because John Wayne is a big part of the books. And that's not a spoiler for the books. It's just, I think we've talked about it before, how John Wayne's kind of a presence there. And we kind of see it now. We see it in his character and how it is something that he's coming to terms with. And he's kind of like a side of him that feels like he just needs to be the strong, resilient guy. And all that he needs to do is just be a good person, but it's making him stuck in his ways, which was interesting.
To that note of the John Wayne stuff, because if you guys recall, we talked a little bit at the beginning of the season how last year at the premiere, Garth Ennis had said that he didn't think John Wayne was going to be in the story. Because, and so one of the questions that I asked this time was, you guys swapped John Wayne for Hitler. Is there a reason? Like, is that a direct, we don't get any John Wayne? And they were like, I don't think that's right. We haven't ruled out John Wayne. So we see him in this episode on TV. Maybe we're going to get the real John Wayne that we see in the book. We'll see. That would be exciting, because that's an exciting part. That is an exciting part, and it's one of my favorite elements of that story.
I could see it going either way. I could see that this being their nod to John Wayne, and it was like a part of his past at that time, and then he kind of moves on, and we don't see much more of it again. Or I could see it being an introduction to later. Especially, not to get too spoilery, but they definitely could come back to it, even just leaving it how it was.
For sure.
Again. So it was really nice to see. And I think they just incorporated it really well.
Yeah.
I would not have thought to do it the way that they did, but especially with like the montage and stuff and like the photo frame, just like subtle ways of where it really kind of shows how he, as the character of John Wayne kind of was weighing on him, especially at that time.
Well, it's also important, though, to realize that reference at the time the comic book was written was a very different reference than it would mean now.
Right.
This is based in present day, and the difference there of 20 years is a major difference. Because
John Wayne was like your father's hero.
And your father's hero. Vietnam, like
Yeah.
all that stuff is very, very significant in a way that now, if you're a young person watching this show, it's not as relatable. So I think they wanted to. It seems like they wanted to incorporate that element, but I don't know how deep they're going to go with it.
There's also something that I really love with the show and how they've updated the show from the comic is addressing, is really fleshing out Tulip, but it also brings up questions of machismo and questions of what's patriarchal, as I always say that word wrong, and I love how Reggie says it wrong too. It's like what is just like a sense of, you know, just the male gaze or the male like domineering sense. And one thing I loved of last episode was Jesse said something the comic book Jesse would never say, which is, "Oh, Tulip can handle it on her own.
Right.
She doesn't need
True.
any help."
Very true.
And I was like, wow, that's like they're evolving the character a lot for the show. But what we see in this episode is kind of a step back to the Jesse in the flashbacks when he's stuck in his ways and he doesn't know where to go. Is kind of terrible to Tulip. He is someone who just sees Tulip as the person that brings in the money, is only getting him a beer, and is really kind of keeping around to get a baby, and he feels like that's the only thing that he needs, and it takes him growing as a person to really see past that, which is where I think he is now in present day story.
Yeah, it is. You make reference to that. That's a really interesting point, that they have developed the character. Like they took the strongest elements of the feeling of the story, and they were like, all right, well, there are certain parts of this though that are a little bit like antiquated, and we should probably update and flesh out a little more. And that feels like the parts of the story they've updated the most.
Yeah.
Also, just for the medium too, like. Even just looking at, you know, a comic book is two-dimensional. The characters are the characters they are. They serve a purpose for the story, and they fit in frame wherever they're drawn. Whereas, especially when you get into TV, you got a script and you write a story, but once you start doing things, especially when you get to a location and then you get your actors, it's just very much more alive. So to have that character actually have some depth and them putting thought beforehand into it, like all of the stuff in season 1 with Tulip now is so much more badass.
Right.
When you kind of get a feel of like where she was coming from in the timeline, and like she just left to go chase after the like, so now her in the car, all that stuff is like, all right, this is actually really cool. So them putting the time into that character is definitely going to pay off.
I also love that we hear Victor in this episode say, I was curious about what the hell that she came from, and the hell that she came from is you. And what we saw was the hell that she experienced was the literal hell that people are experiencing in hell, which is just this monotony over and over and over again.
Totally.
But it isn't terrible. It's just boring. It's just like stuck. It feels like the prison, and it feels like hell. It feels like the hell we know. It's the hell that Arseface is in and Hitler's in. And I love that, like, change. I love that it's not she's having a horrible time, or that she's like on drugs stuck on a couch somewhere.
Right.
That was the hell.
Well,
So
but for her, that is hell, and that like she's an excitement addict. Really, that's what she is.
An adrenaline junkie, as Point Break deemed it.
Yeah, that's what she is, and it was good for me, for someone. I did buy the comic, so I haven't read it, but I'm starting to.
No,
Although
fine.
I started flip through and I went, oh God.
I think it's
this
good
is
to
gonna
have
be
someone
bad.
who doesn't know
This is
the
gonna be
comic.
bad. I love some of these people, and I'm already nervous. Anyway, but something that pisses me off about television shows or a film was when they make me love a character and then they do something that's totally outside of the character, and I'm like, I don't believe they would do that. So when this started for me, I was kind of like, what the hell? Like, this seems like with Jesse being so angry, like we've gotten a little bit, but I don't, and maybe I just watched season 1 like 4 months ago, but still I don't remember like this like aggro Jesse.
Right.
But in seeing the flashback, then it made sense to me. Then because I literally was typing at first, I was going to bring up like, you guys, I totally took me out of the story. I didn't get it. So I think for non-comic book readers, we needed to see this flashback too, because now I really feel like for me, for their relationship, it set the groundwork for. I think it's like somebody said this in the comments, and I agree. It's almost like a calm before a storm.
Well, also poor Reggie. It's the bottom line.
Poor Reggie. Shut up, Reggie. Shut up, Reggie.
We also see before this a shades of dark Jesse, I think, because for one, he fights way too well for Breacher. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the way that he fights and the passion he puts into fighting is itself a dark element. But also the fact that the past with Carlos and his robbery days, you saw a little bit of the darkness, but you didn't understand. Because I think we all just assumed that the Carlos thing happened, they lost the baby, and then they split up. And we thought that was it. And that could have just been it.
Yeah.
But the fact that they kept trying and stuck in the monotony was a lot more realistic, too. It didn't seem comic booky. It didn't seem like a turn of a story.
It's a very adult thing too, of like to be going through this lifestyle and living wild, and then you have this dream, and this is supposed to be your last job, and you start a family, and it all comes crashing down. And he's like, well, maybe we need to be normal people, and that's why. So we need to live this. This is what we have to do, because this is what normal people, that have family and kids, this is what they do.
It was interesting seeing them in that environment too, right? Like it was definitely, you're not going to see a whole lot of that in the show, I don't think. So that flashback was just like, Tulip coming home. But then I also loved the meal they had with Danny, with their old employer.
Right. Danny was such a good character too.
She's great.
That's such a good addition. And something that's like, you wouldn't think that where they're getting all of their mob stuff is from this very Jewish, very New York woman.
Yeah, I think she's in because I live in the area of LA where there's just but it's like gay people and Orthodox Jewish people, so it's very safe. And well, you would think, because I was like, she had the wig and the tights and everything. I was like, that's crazy. It's just hilarious.
Yeah, and it just she was just an interesting character, because I almost felt like at first it was someone they had to pretend to be normal with, it was almost like this.
I didn't know if it was a relative or something.
And she had that disappointed. Oh, you're gonna be a realtor, huh?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, in what scenario would someone be upset at you for? That's a pretty respectable job. Yeah. Right. So that was very interesting. I did not see that coming at all.
Yeah. When that's this whole show, anything you see coming, they're gonna say, just kidding.
And Tulip, she's like, what's she say? I can't eat this. And she's like, what? She's like, no, I literally can't eat this. Human. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's indigestible.
I felt like another theme.
So good.
Another theme that jumped out for me on this show too was, again, why Jesse and Tulip love one another is that they both. Because for me, it was about season 1. We see so much of Tulip pushing Jesse to be bad, and she's driven by revenge.
Right.
And so then we see Jesse, what he does when he's driven by revenge, and where Tulip now is calming him down. But again, I love the line that she says at the end, where they both are so bad for each other that it is good for one another, because they just complement each other perfectly.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I also love. I think we should talk a little bit about the Cass's motivation and Cass's
big time.
What goes into this, because that's building up more character stuff that I absolutely love. Because
I'm just so glad that they dealt with it too, and didn't try to play everyone in this show is completely oblivious to things that are pretty obvious to anybody who's paying attention.
Right.
They're aware of what's going on around them.
We talked about this last week quite a bit, and especially in the spoiler section, just the sort of dropping the bomb in the first season of that, as opposed to in the source material, that doesn't happen, and how we felt about that, starting it out this early. Because it does come out of nowhere in the book. It comes completely out of nowhere. There's just
the love triangle side of it.
Yeah, they just introduce it. It's just Cassidy likes Tulip. What?
Yeah.
So it's nice to see them doing it. But yeah, I thought that scene was great.
But they do this great thing in this episode where, and I know we're kind of jumping around, but so did the episode, because it was kind of just two things happened that
president flashback. Yeah.
That was absorbed.
All right, it's fine. They're good. They can follow.
Yeah,
I believe
but with Cass, because when Cass goes to talk to Jesse, you get a sense that he's first going to try and talk him down, and then when he doesn't talk him down, there's two things that are happening there. One, they're bonding as just two guys.
Bros.
They become closer friends, because he's basically saying, listen, whatever happens, whatever you do, I have your back. So he's able to be seem like a good friend and have his friend's back, while at the same time, what Jesse says about, I'll lose Tulip if this happens, I think he thinks that. And I think it could be a way to get Tulip if he ends up flipping and killing him. So it's kind of, two things could happen. It depends on how you view Cass.
We'll have to talk more about this in spoilers,
Yeah.
but I think in this moment, I think he was
altruistic.
I think he was pretty sincere.
Oh,
in-
I don't know. I'm
I think
thinking.
Okay, so
Oh,
we can
I'm with
we
you.
can
What I like about
can
it
talk
is
about
I
this.
think you're right, and I think you're right too.
Yeah.
I think they're both right. It just depends on how you see Cass, because it is, and that's just a good episode, and it's a good turn because it's he really, by doing that, he's on both sides of it.
Have you guys ever had a good friend who kind of lets you down repeatedly, and you like
Yep.
time and time again
My
shows
best
you
friend.
that he's kind of not a good dude, or she?
He's my brother. I love him, but
Well, like I'm not even saying a family member, but I'm saying like a friend of yours you've known a long time who like you're
no,
close
no,
with.
he's not
you wanna
littler than
believe-
my brother. It's
Oh,
like I grew up at his house and I've known him since
Yeah.
like middle school.
Right.
But
what I always
He's a
find is
human
with those
being.
people, it's like you want to believe they're good, and not more than that, they want to believe. They believe they're
Yeah.
inherently good people, even though like they let you down in this selfish way repeatedly over and over again. And it's like I think with Cassidy, he wants to believe he's a good person or a good vampire. But as he says, when he's admitting to Jesse, he's saying like, "No, I'm selfish. I'm greedy. I'm prideful. I'm jealous." But and he's being honest. He's being totally honest, right? Because he's been alive a long time.
yeah, well, you have to imagine you start to know yourself when you have lived so many lifetimes, especially when that small anecdote of him talking about him being rich.
Yeah.
And just he's such a
That's
fantastic
great.
actor.
He's
You can
so
see it on
good.
his
Yes.
face, like he's
Yeah.
just taken back and he's
Yeah.
like there. All of a sudden, it's so good.
It was
But
great.
just to think about a character like that is that old, that can look at you and say, "Look, I lived this whole life longer than you have. Here's a little bit of wisdom and experience." I think as mad as Jesse was in that moment, and as he was right about all the things, obviously, as he said, but I think there's a part of him that's like, okay, I understand he's a vampire and that he's super old, and I think he might know a little bit about what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that this is what I think, but I think he was kind of in that moment really not having an ulterior motive, but, so I could be wrong. But I also feel like because of his age and like wisdom, like I think there's something very powerful. I've experienced this personally and with other friends, like when you're kind of you're just in kind of a crap state, and your friend, instead of trying to necessarily tries to fix it or tries to like either shame you, they just kind of say, "Hey, I see you for exactly where you are right now, and
Right.
that's okay. Like this is cool." And for me, that's what I saw Cassidy, because probably with his age, he was like, "I get it. I get who you are. I'm not trying to change who you are."
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Yeah.
could
No,
be
I
wrong.
think that's a side of it too. And also, what do you smile at that?
I took my phone out for a second and the flashlight was on.
Yeah.
I meant to
saw
tell you
that
before we
earlier,
started.
but
I saw something
I was like,
shining,
"Oh,
but-
it'll turn off."
And I thought it would turn off, and I was like, "Oh, he won't take his phone out during the show." I was wrong.
Now that we've drawn attention to it, maybe I should just
I was
turn it
wrong.
off.
All right.
Yeah, probably.
I saw
just-
something shining, but I thought it was your beautiful smile. Yeah, and I was gonna say something. And then the flashlight.
And then the flashlight happened.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I think a big message of the show that we see kind of repeatedly over and over again is everybody's an asshole.
Yeah.
And I think even like God's an asshole.
Except for Hitler.
Angels. No. Well, like he's already, he's an asshole.
Right.
So let's show how he's not an asshole. It's
Right.
just about how everyone can be an asshole and they cannot be an asshole. And you see that in this episode really well when Victor's talking to Preacher and talking to Jesse and just being like, if you're wondering why she came with me and not with you, it was because you were being an asshole and I was being nice. And this is a mob boss. He didn't do anything to really sway her over to his side. I didn't get that sense. He was just there and nice and was supporting her, and that was enough.
My only issue with that situation is like, especially from the way that it was led to, at least the way that Tulip presented it when she's like, what happened in Dallas and stuff. I was under the impression that like he did something bad to her, and that's why they ended up breaking up. But at least in my opinion, with the whole birth control thing, like the jobs thing on the side is one thing, but the birth control thing was huge because like he's like praying, and
Right.
this is where he's, at least lore-wise, we're pretty sure he's about as far away from his faith as he can be, and crying, and then this whole vicious cycle of just trying to get pregnant, and she's lying to him
Yeah.
essentially the entire time.
everyone's an asshole. I think
No,
it
you're
was,
right.
it
I mean, that
was-
fits within the theme of the comic book. Is that
Yeah.
there is no black and white. That nobody's perfect. This is the world that we live in. It's just flawed from all angles. That's
Right.
my big takeaway from the comic book. You don't get a lot of depictions of angels where they're making mistakes.
Right.
You don't get a lot of depictions
Yeah.
of demons or evil people. For example, like Cassidy, a creature of the night. For the most part, is presented as a good guy. So it's like just like you said,
Yeah.
everybody's got both sides. For
Yes.
every good person has some secrets there too,
Right.
especially in this universe.
Yeah.
Yeah, just on the Hitler note, just thinking
Back to
of-
Hitler.
Speaking of
for
Hitler.
just because I wanted to, one other question that I asked that was a funny answer was, is Hitler just a giant sissy? What's going on? And Seth Rogen, literal quote, "I don't want to ruin Hitler." Can we move on?
I don't want to ruin
That's a good
Hitler.
That's a good quote.
I hope we do see more, because I wasn't here last week. I hope we do see more of what his hell actually is, because I feel like
Oh,
that
we
was
definitely will.
enough of a teaser that I was like, oh, I
I'm
just
so
wanna see.
excited. Yeah, for the
Yeah.
rest of their ideas of what
Well, we
the
still
rest of
have,
it looks
still
like.
have 7 more episodes left.
Yeah, and with this one, I think I just love that we see how also he got religion a little bit, or he went back to religion, because they're setting up that his dad was a preacher, and you also have that moment of Tulip and Jesse discussing, oh, you're a Custer and I'm an O'Hare, which is nice that they're going back to, we're coming from our families, we're an aspect of our families, we're an extension of where we come from, and that's our safe place. That's where we go back to, where the O'Hares are always trouble and the Custers are always, straight and narrow preacher men.
And that's
Right.
a big thing if you live, I forget where y'all are from, but if y'all live in the South, that's a big thing about who your family is, what your family name is.
Yeah.
I mean, even like my aunts and uncles and grandparents still talk about like what our family did, and are breaking out of that legacy or accepting it. Especially, and I think that's even more so in Texas. So as somebody who's Southern, I enjoy that, because I guess some people, are they Southern that wrote this? I don't even
No,
know.
it's Garth Ennis. He's
No, it's like an Irishman and two Canadians. I
Yeah,
think
That's
who wrote
hilarious.
This,
Well,
actually.
they definitely get that culture and what that means to honor your family.
Well, that's the stuff we were talking about last week. That's that foreigner writing an American character thing that Garth Ennis is so good at, and it's the perspective you get not having grown up here,
Yeah.
and experiencing what American values are through literature and movies, and that's why John Wayne's such an important part of the story, and even is now poking his head into this is like how do you illustrate those classic American ideals that you experience through war movies and things like that.
Yeah.
All these soldiers that come from the South and have accents and talk about their families from back home from movies from the 50s and 60s. So
Right.
yeah, I think that's where a lot of that stuff comes
Yeah,
from.
it's working off the idealism, which is why it's really great to have these foreigners write about America.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought he was gonna kill Reggie.
Yeah, me too.
I thought he was just gonna beat him to death.
That was
Yeah.
savage.
I thought so too. I thought that's what we were going to see. Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad he didn't, because that would be too much for me.
I agree.
Yeah.
also.
But it was just enough to be like, you've
It
gone
was
too far.
Yeah.
And there's no turn
And also
back
too,
from
just the way that they established Reggie of like, yeah, he's a little shithead, but like he presented no threat. He
But
was
he's
trying.
helpless.
He's
He's
trying to
helpless.
leave the situation,
Yeah.
and he won't let him leave. And
Yeah.
then for no reason, he gets the wrath.
Should not beat out of him. Yeah, yeah. So aside from that, we get Cassidy, and we get a little more backstory with Tulip and Victor.
Yeah.
And we see some more stuff with Victor's daughter.
Yeah, I love the line that Victor's daughter has, where it's like, well, it's been a bad day. Her boyfriend's killing my dad right now. And that was a nice little dark moment where she was seeing that. And we also get, because he's been using the voice plenty of times in that mansion, of course, we have the Saint showing up.
Were you guys a little surprised that Tulip wasn't more angry at Jesse for using the voice on her?
I thought that would come up.
I didn't come up at the end of the episode. I thought she would be, no matter what happened, I thought she'd be
Because
furious
that was one of our predictions last week.
The only excuse, in my opinion, is she was so concerned
About him
him
killed.
just killing him that she was not thinking about that. But I think that's definitely going to come up in argument. Like,
Has to.
the next time that they are fight, because they're
Or the
going
next time he
to.
uses the voice.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
didn't she say to him earlier, if you ever use that on me again, I'm walking out or something like that?
Something like that. Some type of threat.
Right. And I think it's a lot of things were going on. There's an interesting question that Ivan has in the chat, which is does Custer even still consider himself a preacher? And I think that's a good question, because I think he's always kind of he's always exploring his faith, and you got to remember he's still tracking down God for God to answer for his congregation and for the human race. So he feels like he is still a preacher, but kind of a reverse preacher as we know it, because usually it's I speak for God, and now it's I speak for humanity talking to God. So I think that's kind of where they're going with why he still wears the preacher outfit.
Well, and he's
why
literally
still
he's seeking God too, you know,
Yeah.
which I guess preachers do that.
Well, yeah, I think he definitely considers himself a preacher.
I think so too.
And I think his mission, obviously, is that he cannot preach the word of God to anyone because God's gone. So
Right.
unless he can find, I don't think that once he finds God in this story in his mind, I don't think that he believes that once he finds God and puts God back on the throne, in theory, if that's the goal, he would continue being a preacher. I feel like he's lost his faith. But I think for now, he believes he's
yeah.
sort
I
of.
think he just has a lot of questions, and
Yeah.
God's the only person that can answer them. So he's searching for God to answer for multiple things and to get these answers to these questions.
Yeah.
Which
Right.
he may or may not be satisfied
And
with.
he has a different definition of preacher too. You think about, we've seen a little bit, maybe you know more from comics, but in the backstory with his father, who was a preacher, his father did not look like the most angelic man. And so like for him, a preacher is not maybe what we would think. And so for him, maybe he thinks he's still following and going back to namesake and being a Custer and all that, and he's still it's somewhere in that box.
Well, I also think though that like when he makes the decision to go back to Anvil, you can see he's not making that decision out of. He's making that decision because he's giving up.
Yeah, well, that's true.
That's clear in his face
Yeah.
when he says it. So I don't actually think there's any part of him that ever believed he was really going to be a preacher to do to do God's work. I think he was sort of thinking this was his way out. He was seeking the baby, the family. That's the other version of the stable.
I
Well,
agree
he's
on that. Well
he's
done.
just lost, right?
Yeah.
So he doesn't like he doesn't want to go back to Danny and
Yeah.
doing that work. He can't do what he's doing with Tulip. That's not working. Oh, the church is open. Well, I guess I could go home. Nowhere else to go, you
Right.
know. And then
Still
in the same
available.
situation where he's still, looking for penance, looking for some type of redemption, looking for a purpose. Boom, he gets hit with Genesis. So when you're already looking for a purpose, now all of a sudden that's why he's like, oh, this is the plan. This is what I'm chosen for, because he's been waiting like literally anything. Tell me what I'm here for. And so he's taking this as his signal. So I think you're right, where definitely not traditional preacher sense, but I do think he considers himself a preacher.
Well, and also he was willing to commit to somewhat like leading the flock in the town, because as we see in season 1, Tulip comes back and he doesn't immediately shy away from the plan. He does try to fend her off and sort of stick to the plan for a little while. So he has some amount of attachment to this idea of himself as this type of preacher, right?
I think it's just him, again, trying to see redemption for his past life and thinking, if I just do this, if I just convert this people, in some way I'll be okay, then I can be a normal person again, or I can get into heaven or whatever.
Yeah, he's trying to redeem himself for his past sins, but also the loss of the baby, because I think the baby is tied into like
Yeah,
all
I
of
think
his
he haunting him.
Yeah,
for
he
sure.
blames himself.
I think we've all done that. That's what I love too about what this episode did for me is I already love these characters, but I saw myself in them, and that's you don't really see yourself a lot of times with these characters, but I feel like so many of us have what's the version of success that I'm trying to do versus a version of success back home? Do I move back home with my parents, or I've done that, like trying to live the quote unquote 9-to-5 life that everybody done, and I hated it.
Yeah.
And I know so many people that have tried to or that are in it and hate it, and so I thought that was again so smart
a
to
lot of
bring
people
this.
that love it though.
Everybody loves the mundane.
It's okay.
It's okay if you love it, but no, but I still think even if you love it, you get a little bit of the monotony. So I have such a I love them together before, but this made me be a little bit like, oh, I love Tulip and
Right.
Jesse together so much.
Let's talk for a second a little bit about the Cassidy and Tulip scene, because it's the one we didn't talk about yet, and it's important that she brought attention to it.
Yeah, I know what you're doing.
I know what you're doing, and she dropped it really. It's like she was annoyed, and she's been annoyed, and she can see it, and she can feel it, but she's kind of like, I'm a strong woman, and Jesse's a strong man, so we can just ignore that this is happening. I'm not really threatened by it, but in this annoyed moment, I'm gonna call you out on it. And it only lasted for a second, but I think what you said earlier, it's super important that they're planting those seeds and they're giving us those little moments.
Yeah, and also I think it's nice to also have Cassidy say several times in this episode, I know this love is real and I know this is a hard love to break up. And by him saying it over and over again, or he says it like 2 or 3 times.
Is he like trying to convince himself?
He's telling himself this, and it also shows that it actually is kind of hurting him too. So it was again doing twofold things, and it's like speaks to how strong of an actor he is, and how I think great the writing is too.
Well, I mean, I think, okay, so Cassidy is the most interesting character in this show.
Yeah.
Just obviously, he's got multiple people's lifetimes inside him. So, but also because of what you're talking about, like, and everything we said earlier, he does believe he's good, even if he's not. And I think that to some degree, there is a lot of good in Cassidy, but I think there's a huge amount of darkness and evil in Cassidy.
I feel
is a
like
vampire,
part
yeah.
of the reason why, especially at the time that they met, Preacher and Cassidy bonded so quickly is because they're going through the same thing. Where, you know, Cassidy himself, who knows what type of nefarious things he's done in his multiple lives, you know? And it very much seems like now he just wants to be left alone. He's not trying to hunt people. He's just trying to be, you know, and he's dealing with people chasing him down.
Right.
But he seems like he's in the same area of like, all right, well, I'm leaving that behind. I'm starting something new. So in that way, they're kind of the same of like, I don't know if Cassidy's necessarily looking for redemption, but he's definitely, it seems like he's looking to live a different lifestyle.
Yeah. And we got a few questions about what type of vampire Cassidy is in the chat, and it's not really spoilery because he's all we know about him is that he lives very long. He doesn't have fangs. He just has regular teeth. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that's the case. And he just kind of...
I feel like I've seen him with fangs. I feel like it's one of those...
he just has like canines.
He can draw fangs when he needs to.
I don't think so.
I need to
Maybe
re-look.
just on covers of comic books. I'm not sure if
I
that's
feel
actually...
like on the first
I don't
episode,
even in the comic books. I think he just has regular teeth.
I thought
Just
on the
sharp
plane
canines?
on the first episode he had like sharp teeth.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
Not
Someone can correct me.
fangs, but yeah.
But from
no,
what-
because you're supposed to not know. You're not supposed to not realize he's a vampire until he hits the ground and then
Yeah.
drinks the cows and stuff.
And
gets
then
back
he
to
like he's able to bite into people and drink their blood, and I think he's a little stronger than most people.
yeah,
But he, besides that, he can't go into the sun, and that's basically it.
yeah. He seems
That's
pretty
like-
classic vampire.
He's not like a little stronger. He's like super
He's
strong.
super. He's
super
very
fast.
He's a
quick.
lot stronger.
Yeah,
Yeah, but we haven't really seen
I
that
think
yet.
he
but
might be a
is.
little bit stronger in the book than in the show.
Really?
Granted, we haven't really
Yeah.
seen.
Yeah.
but I feel that way.
It's true. We haven't seen
Yeah.
like any craziness yet of him knocking down a wall or anything.
Right, and a big part of the reason why he's hanging out with this group is so we can follow these characters that's a preacher but bad, and a vampire but good. And we kind of are able to see kind of the shades of gray between the two.
Yeah, I also think that. Well, actually, no, I'll save that for predictions. Should we maybe get into predictions?
Yeah,
Does
let's
that
get
make a good plan?
into safe, spoiler-free
So-
predictions.
yeah, that sounds good.
Your AfterBuzz TV predictions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think next week it looks like we're gonna get more into the lore of the Saint
Yeah.
from the next week on, which I'm excited
You saw
about.
in the preview they had some of the like just comic book covers.
Yeah, they had like the
It
art
was
from the
It
comic.
was the Saint. It was awesome.
Oh, I didn't see that.
It was great to
Yeah,
see that.
it's
And
like, oh, that's the
Oh,
face.
that's what y'all freaked out
Yeah.
about. I
Yeah.
was just watching.
That
They went,
snarl.
"What?" I didn't know.
yeah.
That was
Yeah.
really bad. I'm not
So I
gonna do that.
think that's going to be a
good
great
snarl.
like reveal. One prediction I kind of have that I feel like they're going to loop back to, and someone mentioned this in the chat. I think Elliot, mentioned this in the chat.
Good name.
The dog guy. It would be nice to find out that was actually God at some point. Because they kept saying, like, you're about to meet God, you're about to meet God, and then they meet a guy in a dog suit, and they're like, that's not God, and then they
Right.
leave. That might be God. That's kind of a maybe prediction I have.
I could see that in this show.
I think as we are continuing to see like this sort of talented Mr. Ripley situation of Cassidy being the Matt Damon to some degree, I do think that
movie.
we're gonna get. I think that Tulip is gonna start to talk to Jesse about Cassidy by the end of this season.
Right.
I think she'll try to address it, and I don't think it's going to be a full-fledged conversation. I think she will start to engage because something's going to happen this season, and she wants to tell Jesse, but it won't go there. And then she'll keep it to herself, or Jesse will get pissed, or something like that. I just get the feeling they're going to almost get there, and then it's not going to resolve.
Well, with Jesse's reaction, I mean, that's what I thought too. I thought, oh, when he finds out about
Yeah.
Cassie and Tulip, shit's gonna hit the fan.
Yeah. But it's also, I mean, You also get the feeling that they're kind of like, why stir the pot? Let's keep this as safe as possible.
Right.
No one's really doing anything terrible yet. So I feel like it's gonna simmer for a little while, but
I think this season up too. I think you're right.
I think I don't think that it'll go down that road all the way. I just think that they're gonna tease it.
According to the fandom wiki, he does not have fangs. Just the red eyes, though.
Well, that's the difference between the comics and this. Is he has like really never see his eyes.
Yeah, because he's always got those sweet red shades.
Yeah, and when you do, they're pretty like whoa.
Yeah, the eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, except for that, which is nice that he's not wearing glasses because he's such a good actor. I think that'll actually hurt the
Although it was really nice when he did put on the red shades. I think in episode 2 when they were leaving him by, I was like, yes, there they are.
Yeah, that was good.
It's awesome.
Yeah, so I also think we're going to find out more about family members. And that's all I'll say until we talk about maybe comic book spoilers. Which I think we're about to do.
Sure. Yeah, should we get into it? All right, guys.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
Okay, so...
Spoiler alert!
So sign off right now. Turn off your iPad, your iPhone, your Android, what have you, or your YouTube if you don't want to hear us talk about things from the comic book where you're going to get directly into those things right now.
Let's go.
Okay, so... I think talking about being a Custer, being an O'Hare, more about the Langels. I think we're setting that up like crazy.
Oh yeah.
Well, I've said for a long time that I think the end of this season is going to be
Leading into it.
that. I
I
think.
hope it's like a little before the end of the season, like it's the penultimate episode or something.
I'm telling you, the big. I mean, I think I said it on a prediction once here before, but the big like cliffhanger that happens in that storyline, I think is how they're going to end the season.
Right.
I've felt that way for like a little while now.
Yeah, I also think that next week, I think we're going to get more of the Grail because they're going to be investigating the lore. And when they're looking into the lore of religion, the Grail's going to kind of take notice.
I was almost expecting the Grail to be at the door, like Hair Scar or something, to be at the door instead of the Saint. But obviously, when we saw the noise and stuff, I knew it wasn't
right. And also, if people don't realize, the Grail are the people in white.
Yeah, the guy you saw that guy last episode, I guess it was. Yeah, it was last episode.
I think it was the one before this. I don't think we saw any of them. I think we just saw the sign.
The fourth episode, I think. The fourth episode, you saw him sitting at a desk. The guy with a scar over his eye.
Yeah.
Hair star.
One thing that I don't think we're gonna get that we get in the comics that happens in New Orleans in the comics is that kind of goth group that like
Les Enfants du Sang.
Yeah, they all want to be vampires, so they hang around the Cass, and you see a bit of a darker past of Cass in that storyline.
I hope we get that the story in a bottle episode though. You know where he goes and he finds.
Don't reveal too much because we don't want to. But yeah,
he goes back and he finds that vampire, the other vampire.
Right.
That's like one of my favorite stories from the comic because it's like hilarious.
Yeah.
It's a standalone story, and I hope we get it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping we get more like of the other vampires in the world.
Yeah.
Eventually, but that can also be a storyline that can happen in New York. The Goths can be in New York.
Agreed.
They don't have to be in New Orleans. So I don't think it feels like we're getting too crowded in New Orleans. So. And I think this season's going to take place here, and then next season's going to be in another location.
I don't think we're going to be in New Orleans. New Orleans.
I
do really
very long. You think so?
Purpose. I don't think so. I think we're going to maybe 2 or 3 more episodes, especially now that the whole thing with Victor has essentially been resolved.
That's true.
I think we're going to. It looks like we're going to.
The Saints there too.
Yeah.
Usually they've been running.
Well, it looks like in the teaser we're getting some type of. I think next episode we're seeing that thing I told you about last week. I think we're going to see some type of a device now that's going to let him get some space actually from the Saint, because this whole like running back and forth and him just following up and killing whoever they dealt with is going to get old real quick.
Yeah.
So, and I'm glad that they're not stringing it on, but it seems like next week we're going to get the, you stay here in New Orleans, we're leaving someplace else. Somehow they're going to figure a way with their research or whatever.
But I also think that if the family members are going to come back, they're going to be coming back in New Orleans because they're pretty close to them right now.
Yeah.
So I feel like you could stay in New Orleans and just go to hell a little bit more. Yeah. You can spend some time with the Grail. You could look into Dennis. I want to find out more about Dennis.
Yeah, I do want to know about Dennis.
Well, also remember though that the family member storyline in the comic book, they've already erased the part of the story that got us there has already been changed. So to get to the family is gonna have to be a different entry point now, which they can do any way they want.
Right.
One thing I was going to say is, and we talked about this last week a little bit, but what's your prediction for when the big turn, like in this triangle we're talking about, the big turn that like, I think it's like book 6 in the comic books that it happens, the Grand Canyon stuff.
You know what I think is going to happen? I think they're going to be split up again before it happens again.
Oh, I see.
No.
So I think before that big turn.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be the opposite. I think they're either gonna be like close to having a baby or like really doing like for once doing really well.
Because that's a huge moment.
Do we know how many
book.
seasons
Right, but-
that they played on the show?
They've
And
said
that's why I think it's sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
That's why I think it's like I think Cassidy is being earnest and they're really setting him up to be earnest, because then it's the fallout afterwards, and then also now it being kind of okay-ish. That is the only reason why it goes to the place it does. Because I don't think that I personally, the way I see Cassidy, I don't think that he is trying to play the game to end up with Tulip. I think he legitimately is like, oh shit, I fucked my mate's girl.
Yeah, I gotta be
Before
cool.
I knew, I'm not. I really like this guy. We have a good friendship. I'm not trying to fuck this up.
Well, also, yeah, because the turn that we're talking about doesn't come deliberately. It comes like sort of by accident.
Right.
But I honestly, and so to answer your question, Matt, it's one of Seth or Evan last year told me they wanted to do 7 seasons. That's what they were hoping
That sounds
for.
about right.
So that's almost the length of the books. There's like 8 books, I think.
Right.
Um,
I don't know, because it could also be like when the family comes back and people are split up.
Yeah.
That'll be a good time to have
Yeah.
something happen. But I
No, you're right.
I'm curious to see where they know they have a better sense of pacing now, and they have a better sense of everything. So
I have
I'm gonna
faith
follow their
in
lead.
whatever they're doing.
Another question, just more information from this interview. I asked, do you plan on using all of the relevant storylines from the comic? Like, is your intention to use them all?
Interesting.
And I think it was Evan or Sam, one of the guys said, as you could see from season 1, like with Odin Kincannon, he was like, there were some characters that we just knew we were going to use. We needed to use those characters, but we didn't know necessarily how. We weren't going to tell the story without him, but we found a way to use him, for instance. So he said, yeah, I think you can expect pretty much anything super relevant in the story will show up. It's just a question of chronologically when it'll show up. We're not sure.
And how it changes.
Yes.
Because obviously the Quincannon storyline is not.
It's nothing
the
like that
same.
we saw.
I don't know if I mentioned this a few episodes back, but there's one issue that has a big tribute to Lenny Bruce moment in it, where they talk about how important Lenny Bruce is.
I do think I remember that, yeah.
To the initial character, which as a comic was kind of important to me, even though I'm not a giant Lenny Bruce fan. It was a nice way of talking about him and kind of exploring him. And one thing I noticed a couple of episodes back was in the casino, there was a big poster of Lenny Bruce.
Oh, interesting.
And that was a nice little nod towards kind of the influences of the comic.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, guys, I think that's going to wrap us up. Unless somebody else had any big thoughts they want to throw in for spoilers. I'm sorry, Matt. I've spoiled everything for you.
No, I'm still.
I think we're being pretty safe.
Pretty good job
No,
of
it's okay.
tiptoeing.
Kind of vague.
They got mad at us for revealing a big thing last season, I think almost right away when we started talking about the comic books. But we're not there yet, and it might not even happen because they're going in a different direction.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
I'm planning on starting to read when I drive down to Comic-Con. Well, I'm not driving,
I
I'm
have
reading.
I have all the comics I can lend you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you want to follow along with any one of us, you can catch us. I'm Ben Bateman. You can find me at Ben Bateman Media on Twitter or Instagram.
Dave Child at MRDaveChild, DaveChild.com. My name's Dave Child.
Nate Miller. You can find me on social media at Dog Like Nate.
Nate's a duck. Nate's a duck. What?
Nate's a duck. I'm Matt Marr. You can find me at the Matt Marrs, 2 T's, 2 R's, or at mattmarr.tv.
Bye, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Take care.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Do not visit Nate the Duck.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.